Hello everyone, I want to talk to you about a very important topic today that I have never much addressed on the channel, although the most affection of you, the most faithful, the ones from longer date will know of one specific video that once I made that is not the traditional meaning of arrows or that thing, because I even technically started a series about that a couple of years ago, but I made just one episode and I didn't explain that further. And actually, that would be a very interesting topic to sort of restart to discuss in truly a spiritual sense. However, I thought that talking from my standpoint, like considering what we discuss on the channel and considering that YouTube is a sort of male-dominated platform. I have a lot of young guys, but also a section, like 1/10 of girls down YouTube, which is also very interesting, that follow me at most as demographics, slightly younger than me. I'm mostly in the same age group that follows me, but I'm aging myself. And I really would like to say, not give you some advice as if, I don't know, I was the old man that's telling you have to do this or that, but I say thought much about these topics in my life. I've experienced different things in my life. I went through different stories in my life, and I noticed a very interesting pattern, and I would like to just discuss it with you, right? So also for the youngest that I hope are, 18 plus, on the internet to begin with, I could act, now that I think about it, almost like as a fatherly figure, like where, a father in my, had been myself a father in my late teenage, and for other people, like, they're also including older than me, like to see how this resonates, and especially where does this go, because I noticed that there is properly a path of development that I followed by studying tradition, history in general, warfare, history of religion. There is a video that I made about von Clausewitz telling you to believe in yourself, which was made before, a major heartbreak in my life that it's actually what I was alluding to before, like eventually came up with it, said, I vented a little bit in that video, but telling essentially to maintain your own control and your emotions, because I think that say the Jordan Peterson peak moment, right? Some years ago, there was an understanding that there are so many different dispossessed young males or frustrated young males, unaccomplished young males, or at least. And I've always rejected the premise that that issue is fundamentally just about rolling up your sleeves and tidying up your room. That's literally how it starts, but as an advice, remains there. There is a more elevated, right, path that you go through, and it should be pointed out that it doesn't get easier with time. It doesn't get easier with experience. There are some things that get easier, but you essentially tend to get ever more excited at wielding more power, achieving something greater, right? And this goes for many things in life. You're supposed to mature and to have, in fact, the capacity of handling yourself. And even though I think that it is true that there are so many disoriented young people in general, I think that this should be spoken also for the voice of those of us that were, in a sense, luckier or more blessed, and however you want to see it, more capable in some cases, and that still, not just have something to say about the difficulty of it, but let's say that can help others sort of not making the same mistakes, to which you learn this stuff actually the hard way. So I will try to be as impersonal in my videos I normally am, but it's obvious that much of this stems also from my personal life. And I didn't think I would go by grades because I wanted this to be just a broader reflection on heartbreak. All right, heartbreak is the topic of this video. Why in particular? Because it may seem the problem of this all. Like, men have this specific goal in life, right? We need to provide. We need to prove how the best version of ourselves. We thrive in that, and the woman is exactly the perfect companion. What makes the pair greater than the sum of the two persons. Right? This is a very important aspect to start from because it aligns with the various traditional doctrine of mystical bodies, right? And marriage, in the deepest union between a man and a woman, is fundamentally and deeply enshrined in such tradition. At the same time, for how beautiful the picture can be, and especially as we live in Europe in 2026, we look, I don't know, at our grandparents and how oddly or apparently easy it would have been, I don't know, for people that generation to just find someone to settle down with, like, and how sort of more difficult for different reasons this is today. At the same time, it's important to bring back von Clausewitz into the equation, because if we're talking mostly man to man here, there is some directional guidance. I mean, the point is, this is a struggle. This is actually the highest one, and not in a sort of hyperbolic sense. Like, it can be argued, at least I've come to feel, I'm a very sentimental person, I will tell you this much, even if I may not necessarily sound or act like this. There is, let's say, an emotional side of men that does not necessarily have not to exist, right? There are some forms of sort of untouchability that are important, but I think that the greatest challenge is succeed where we care about the most, and it's impossible to do that, to go about that without emotion. That what really matters is what you do, not just, of course, in front of the woman, but in this sense publicly, like how you act in general, even just with yourself. Like, if you, how loyal do you have to be to your principles? How consistent you have to be with your discipline? This is all something that matters, and that ultimately matters more, like the form over the substance of your feelings, right? So I don't think I'm going to make many other videos about this topic unless people are interested, because again, I'll try, especially in this one, to put all kind of my general insights on the question, and I will especially try to come up with an assessment, at least regarding the level that I achieved personally. The higher level of love that is truly, also, if you look, we have seen it very often in tradition, in the European theology, in the same Christianity. Love is truly at the center of the universe. This is not a sort of hippie form of love. This is not being simply lenient, tolerant. Actually, you can argue that the more you love someone, the harder you have to be in different ways, not, say, in a figurative sort of violent sense, but you have to help them grow as much as you are grown. And heartbreak is the knot of this all, because honestly speaking, for myself, I had a very easy life, right? And I feel incredibly fortunate for this. I know that so many people struggle for things that, we often appreciate here, like things like material issues, etc. It's like we all have material issues to some degree. There are people that are obviously more plagued by those than others, and not necessarily because they don't have actually a moral capacity. And actually, probably it's the worst when things go wrong, when you actually have such great force. In our condition is miserable enough, and the word so complex, by the way, for these problems to arise once again. It should be pointed out, I obviously say I'm not particularly aligned with psychological debate or clinical psychology in particular. It's true that especially the latter is a bit more detached from the leftistic side of the story. If you go to a psychologist, I've never really done anything like this. today. However, the insight is mostly you're fine. You're just 100% okay the way you are. You shouldn't beat yourself over this matter, whatever. And that is not really useful and helpful. It can be helpful, say, I don't know, if you literally just to talk to someone in that sense and hearing something encouraging, but that will not actually solve your problem. All right. So if you're struggling, if you have been painfully afflicted by love, I personally think it's a beautiful thing. I've come to this realization that fearing to love is it's wrong, right? It's silly. It does not actually help you, because even when you fail in love, you actually learn so much, and probably you learn much more than you would have thought you could ever learn, in a way. And that's the moment in which you really understand that love is truly the most important thing in the world. And especially if you fall in love in the clinical way, the transcendental realization that love is truly a gateway to heaven is something potently self-evident. You probably, like, different people have different experiences with this. Like, sometimes you discover that some people never really fell in love with anyone, and that's terrible. I am not particularly predisposed to fall in love, but it happens every once in a while. And I'll tell you, it's not a funny thing, right? It's painful, especially as it eventually fails, if it fails. And I think that few people in life actually succeed in being fulfilled love-wise. And I really wish all of you to really have a family and to really be the best version of yourself, really. Not just for yourself, which is definitely something, but for the people you love and you all in that mystical body that I was discussing, right? Today's video is, however, going to be particularly empirical, because it is really true, as we know, so Clausewitzianly speaking, that direct experience is much more revealing than any kind of theory. Like, there are some coaches that are that have never really played the sport and are good, right? But the staunch minority. Theory helps to inform the knowledge per se, but the direct experience is something completely different, and it's also here what fundamentally love teaches you. We'll not talk only strictly about heartbreak, but you have to understand why and how these things come about. So first of all, it's impossible to describe what falling in love, clinically speaking, feels like. When you get into it, you know it. I will tell you that much. Like, it's not a wish. It's not like, those people that happens normally to girls, like, oh my God, I want to fall in love. If you're a dreamy, kind of romantic type, whatever, also as a man, obviously you would have that ambition, but that really starts from the girl, all right? And unfortunately, this often happens. Like, there is this phase, like when you fall in love as a teenager. That's probably the not necessarily the most devastating, but I think sort of the rawest experience, the one you don't really necessarily have many defenses against. So there is one strange aspect, that is, the younger you are, actually the more programmed you are to break your own head against something, right? And this is true, as we'll see now. For example, once I was heartbroken in my late 20s, it was a miserable experience. It was the most painful one, the one actually that caused me some chemical issue, and that was not fun, and I will explain it later. But because I also knew how worthier the person was for me at that point in time, and everything. And especially, again, when you fall in love, it's very, very, very difficult to come out of it. It takes normally 1.5 years. Me, I personally experienced that. It's perfectly within the perfect norm of the lower end, actually, of clinical psychological sort of a timeline for these things. Sometimes even 2 years. That really depends. I never really got into some pathological obsession, whatever, but sort of paranoia, resentment, that thing can develop. But and never in a sort of pathological sense. At least in my case, fortunately, it didn't happen, especially at that point. That I would say is something that happens more when you're younger, all right? When you fall in love with that girl that seems that has been made for just for you, right? I personally experienced at that age, that early age, this incredibly strange thing that I literally drew portraits of this girl before even knowing her, right? And eventually I met this girl that literally looked like just these portraits, and I fell in love with her madly, and I did the unthinkable, including essentially, given the circumstances, because I met her physically somewhere, but I didn't. Let's say we didn't leave close, and so it was a bit of a problem. It was mostly a distance thing. It it brought immediately about all those issues, not just how properly the course of the thing goes. Like you start first, you're all hyped in the first months, then you start crying, and you do so because you think it's what happens to you is beautiful, but at the same time you start hating because you're yet not having the girl, and that is the moment in which it goes south, and you're starting to make compromises with yourself. You're starting really to feel physical pain, hate, and all this stuff, and it's really a terrible experience. But at that age, you really don't know any better, and you are mostly in love with the idea of love. So if you're passing through that kind of thing, the best advice is sort of the most obvious one, the most cliche, namely, it's gonna pass, right? It's not simply making it pass because it has the course properly, but if you're wondering if it ever passes, if you're going to remain with that for all your life because it never happened to you before, no, it's going to pass. Right. It's later in life that certain things may not pass in the way we intended, but not even the first love actually ever passes, if we are truly honest. And I don't want to dramatize in the sense that, you're still thinking about that girl, when you were 18 and, you're now 30 plus, whatever. It's something different. It's the way that experience, that heartbreak shapes you and makes you. With me, it's also a matter of personality, right? It can all go differently depending on who you are and whatever. With me, it made me a bit more melancholic in life, a bit more sort of acceptant. Can't say fatalist at all, but let's say more like this life is a journey. This thing simply happened, and I will keep always this memory within me, and this name of this person will. Can't say resonate every time I will be heartbroken again per se, but the experience is the same. It's the first time you felt it, and so it's more etched in your memory in a strictly sensorial sense, right? And at that point, say relationship or not, it can be very difficult. I would like to point this out, that there are people that do very crazy things for love and heartbreak and really have mental issues that go even the unthinkable. Right, there are suicides. There are people who actually kill others. So we know pretty well how wrong this thing can be. However, in a normal scenario, for how painful it can be, it doesn't really leave any crippling trace. Like it affects you. Again, you're not going to be as let's say it never is quite going to be as before. But it's helping you in managing the situation. Especially at that age, you have this massive psychological edge that feels literally as, okay, someone else is coming by along the way, because, the threshold of your 20s, you're definitely and legitimately thinking about this. I will not here try to explain any kind of matrimonial strategy, what kind of woman you have to search for in your life. That could be an interesting video, but let's say, the point that I'm making in this one, if you wonder why I suddenly gotten crazy here, is truly to give some positive advice on how to cope with the heartbreak, right? Because the rest is something also very complicated. It can be discussed in any other way. What is better at this point in history, like to simply have children very young, or later down the line with whom, how to search, whatever. These are completely different topics, fairly unrelated. All right. There is actually a hard part of the same that has to do with how truly sort of exhausted, in a sense, our world seems, also from a human point of view, how morals have collapsed, how people have enfeebled, and how essentially more cynical, individualistic, and unwilling to truly make the actual effort to have a relationship we have become. So that's, if you wonder why the demographics, the fertility rate is dropping and everything, it's largely because of this moral issue. It's not because, and I think men feel this the most because it's like, I don't know, online dating, all that kind of stuff. You would think that if there was somebody minded as you, it would be fairly easy. If you're a serious person, if you really want to have a family, etc., like you would fundamentally find a girl, maybe just 1 out of 600, I don't know, a couple of women a year with which you can try that, right? Some succeed, some don't, but it's not that easy, for example, to simply say, well, if I have a solitary life, or if you just live in a small place, to actually and easily find wherever you want. And this may be actually one of the greatest motivations behind a lot of things that men do, work-wise, for example, with jobs, with transfers, with careers, with profession. It is almost all aimed at, will women actually and eventually like me once I succeed, right? So it's actually a very pressuring moment. I'm not going to treat, in fact, this video as, okay, we are merely discussing the passive heartbreak, because that's, in fact, what heartbreak tends not to be. It's never about, okay, it's like an illness that struck you for no reason. You catch a cold and you feel bad for a while and say, damn it. No, this is something you got yourself into, and that you're either going to come out of it victorious and successful in an extraordinary way, which is truly extraordinary also from a strictly statistical point of view. Most people getting together do not actually love each other, right? That they haven't clinically fallen in love with one another. They may like each other very much. And in fact, I think that as you step up, love truly does become something closer to Aquinas' definition, wanting really someone's good. The problem is, what does that actually mean? And don't make the mistake in the sense of thinking that it's merely an abstraction. Because some of you will say, but how can I want somebody's good without having sort of a level of egoism, of proprietary rights, of some kind of wish, right? Remember being and becoming. The fact that the unmoved mover purely loves, just like God in the Aristotelian mechanism of the same Thomistic. Because he's devoid of attachment, fundamentally. Humans long, right? Yearn are in this sense incomplete, and they are weak. They are in this sense also morally reprehensible. They make mistakes. They're not perfect, right? There are people who say, we love each other exactly because we are not perfect, right? Because we see, obviously, we want a preferential partner to be more complete, and there is a balance of things that can work. The extremes never quite really work with one another. But in this sense, the idea of fixing ourselves through this mystical body of the union, and so something like a family is more important than the sum of its own elements, right? Especially the parents as such, as opposed to the children, is a very specific traditional idea that ends up matching the same biological bond, right? And so it's not merely an abstraction like saying, this is a merely rational way of seeing love. No, that's not how it works, also Thomistically speaking. Then there is a bad beast that apparently affects lots of people. I personally never really understood how that is, namely being addicted to sex in general. Many people say it's porn, or we know, let's say, what this entails in general, even for people that are not in a relationship, and this is a problem that especially hits you in the I wouldn't say the youngest years, but actually the later ones, especially around probably your peak of power, physically speaking. So around your early 20s, right? And that is in particular the moment in which you're stepping into more serious relationships in a way or another, right? There are people who have sort of relationships pretty early on, but fundamentally an incredibly powerful driver at that age is mere physical attraction. And this happens to anyone. Like, physical attraction is always there. Like, you can't love somebody you're not really physically attracted to, in any sort of humanly realistic sense, right? There are things like pity, like admiration, like convenience, like all these things. Love is something else. Like, love is not something to be customized according to subjective definition. It's something very specific, objective, and in this sense archetypally absolute, that can't know divergence in this regard. And at that point, I would say that heartbreak, or at least the greater problem of pain, the connected with this phase is jealousy, is the sense that essentially you are, and this is actually lingering in the problem of heartbreak itself. The psychology of heartbreak is terrible, right? It's this sense of not having been given a chance to prove yourself, right? This is truly, in a manly sense, the deepest issue behind that. The fact that you actually are worthy and you have a huge potential. You're just not, a sack of potatoes that lays on the couch all day long, and the woman does everything for like. It is about actually being in a mature relationship when you want to make things work with a person that you truly bond with, right? And technically, the best way to do this is in the 20s. Like, the contrary to what is commonly said, this may be true for social cultural reasons today that heavily influence people, but only because they're weak, right? But the best, say, bond you can form with someone is early on in life. It's sadly ever more difficult to form a sound bond in life later on, unless probably you're a very developed person and you're able to understand the value of someone, which is, however, definitionally a very complicated, very rare thing to be found from the other side, right? So the man is the leader of the relationship. There is no doubt about this, even though women are sort of stereotypically depicted as the ones that accept whether this can happen or not, which is evidently the case. This does not mean that men are subject to that. That is a vision of the man as a boy, right? As a toy, as an animal, essentially as a beast. That also in the chthonic, Demetric, gynecocratic degeneration of the heroic principle, right? That truly virility embodies, right? So any of that is bad, right? There are people who are really sick in many ways in this world, but I would say this much. It's also, again, I've always found it strange how, for example, conservatives have this issue with addictions. I never really sort of been, actually, I will see now, I've been addicted to adrenaline, and it's not an interest due to a heartbreak, by the way. It's not a very good thing, but let's say being addicted to something that is merely instrumental. American conservatives are very open, for example, about the addiction to porn, which apparently is also something, especially among the youngsters that literally live with their faces glued in a screen, and so tend to see reality in sort of a bit different ways in which we were habituated to. And there are surely some weak people, but this is not much a biological mechanism. This is actually, it is biological, obviously everything is biological, but it is, let's say, index of personal weakness. Normally, a person does not get addicted to things to begin with, right? Only if you carve out of that a niche for reasons probably are also progressed, like severe issues. This thing tends to deviance. But it is also fairly rare and is usually accompanied by very specific, ultimately, so either pathological, but also in the sense socially unacceptable behaviors, very often also with crime, right? Think about pedopornographic addictions, like, Chris Hansen kind of catches where they literally all say the same thing. They are all molded with the same identical practice, identical experiences. They speak the same identical words, right? So that is truly not just pathological but criminal. most men experience instead within, of course, the complete norm of heterosexuality. Let's not even talk about homosexuality today, because given that their advice is univocal and simple, cut off with it, right? It doesn't matter whatever you have been told. That's not the way to go, all right? And there are very specific reasons for it. They are mainly psychological. I'm not going to address this. Again, I'm not going to make, but I'm accentuating all these eccentricities to speak to the sort of more rank and file guided of my phalanx here. And the point with sort of your early 20s, that level of rampant, almost sort of, I can say aggressive, pursuit of women, but that sort of physical attachment, like that sense of, the attraction that does not, that's not stop in front of everything, or at least, hopefully, the same girl, if she's not, of course, consenting. That is a moment in which you should be, you really look back to in life and you say, I should have controlled myself more, right? But not because you would, or I personally, for example, did anything particularly wrong, but say in general, later on when you age, you say, was that relationship even just necessary in my life? And I'm talking about, I don't know, empty sex or something like that. I'm truly talking also serious relationships with people that, however, seemed in retrospect wrong, because maybe they were even good people, but the circumstances made it obvious that it couldn't work in different ways. What happens, for example, with the ex-post perspective as the years pass, is to see how different people you became. When you're young, you're dumb, but there are people who remain about that level of development while you eventually go past. And so it's very difficult at that point to have a mere, for example, to maintain an attraction, to simply want with your ex. That's the moment in which you, again, you man up and you say, look, I want things that matter in my life, but it starts becoming ever more difficult. And at that point, where do you draw the line as well? And I suspect, in fact, a great deal, just to come back to the problem of lack of natality and so on, is the fact that we have been raised, especially like as we have certain standards for, and this is not the entire picture, but it's important for many of us, to actually get the so-called right thing, right? So let's first of all be honest about one thing. Soulmates do not exist. All right, there are definitely some predispositional factors that are incredibly heavy and important, right? But there isn't such a thing like a person that simply remains the same, especially over the years, in a predictably consistent fashion that allows you to be safe, that that relationship will even just succeed, right? This is also the risk, obviously, of getting involved young, all right? Engagement, marriage, children, etc. It's incredibly risky for today's social-cultural background, right? And so people were permitted everything and that think that they can do whatever they want, to simply say, okay, I will get married, we'll settle down in my 20s, and in my 30s, I will be necessarily a happy person, having saved 10 years along the line, right? That's not, unfortunately, how this tends to work, right? And this may even have to do with how sort of developed or undeveloped people really are. In the past, for example, people were not particularly developed in any sort of broader intellective sense, right? They were very intelligent, don't get me wrong, they were very strong, but their life and their sustenance was incredibly tied to very specific rhythms, and marriage, in a sense, did not, but eventually adapt to it. Like, it was the same way for the woman to be dependent, to have a living proper, to have her honor respected, to be protected, and etc. And for the man to produce and being assisted in the household and sort of pulling the cart in that picture. Today, all this has been canceled. It's not even about feminism. Those things obviously do not help. Those are toxic and sort of they're actively destroying the system. It's largely, unfortunately, spread these ideas, again, of people can do whatever they want, as if there wasn't a point just in being people, for that matter. So that's why we don't talk about this, the sort of the dreaded LGBTQ, whatever the blip like that is even supposed to be said for. And the main issue here, it seems mostly starting to juggle with the realization at that age that, for example, you may easily at that point get into a relationship without loving a girl, right? You may actually like her very much. I must say, this was my personal experience. I got with a girl who was actually beautiful. That naturally is difficult to simply find in life, at least until you are particularly accomplished and if you really score particular hits. But that also had lots of issues, as I was saying before. So she wasn't even a bad girl, but she had had a rough childhood and past, whatever, and this heavily affected her behavior. She had, unfortunately, mental health issues, and I thought at the time like I could fix her because she was beautiful. She was actually smart. She was intelligent. She was not a derelict person, but she was, in that sense, sabotaging herself and our relationship at some point, in ways that she never really actually told me goodbye. She ever said that things like, if I could be with someone in my, if I could ever be with someone in my life, that would be you, possibly. Like, it wouldn't be anybody else. Which is a deep thing to hear. And there are all other issues connected with heartbreak, for example, like your teenage, not crush, but properly full love. Like if she's also a person that does not respond to you, in that case, probably we're very different people. I had fallen in love with the wrong person, right? So she actually had problems herself. And I tried, even in that case, particularly to try to help her, right? And I don't want to be, let's say, again, I don't want to talk about my past in particular, but I must say this, that you can understand the limits of your righteousness in those moments, because I can't hide that sometimes when there are these problems, the person will appear as more fragile, as the more miserable they are, and if things are not going well, you're going to think like, okay, if things do not go well for her, maybe that's where I can come as a savior, or she's going to stick around more. Nothing more false. When you feel down, and this is something that can happen to anyone for whichever reason, beyond heartbreak. Actually, heartbreak is something very peculiar. Never really, I had sort of devastating things happening to me due to heartbreak, but I've never in that moment simply shut to life or to other things per se. There are other things, like, unfortunately, and this happens all today in many places. Think about war. I unfortunately witnessed to firsthand relational issues due to this and the consequences of it. Think about any particular situation. Remember, I was years ago had a problem at home fundamentally, and it was actually a pretty serious problem, not something to like irreversible, but I could lose a couple of years of my life and work fundamentally due to that, and which in my condition it doesn't make sense, because that was probably an illegal thing that had happened. It didn't depend on me and on whoever was involved in this as well, and I felt really down. I felt like I was lingering on a hope, on something that, and I was close. If I had encountered some of the girls I fell in love with, or I had a relationship with at that time, it would have been shot. I would have maybe liked to bookmark them and say, okay, let's see each other later when this problem is over. But I understand that there are moments and situations when people are not ready for it, and with heartbreak in particular, it's one of the single most painful things ever, because there are some people that, in this, I think it's especially it's a behavior that I encountered with women. I think men are much more out there, like, yes, let's try to make it work, even if I have problems, right? Girls, I think it has to do that they're more fragile in a sense. Like women can be extremely resilient, right? But we all know that, of course, they have a very different way to the world and their feelings, what concerns an individual. They need security. They need to feel protected, to be in an environment that is conducive to their well-being. And unfortunately, that is true also for so it also affects a relationship if outside issues are rendering her in that sense unavailable, not because she doesn't like you or because she has actually anything about you. And this is actually a lesson that I would like you to realize when you cope with heartbreak, because as we'll see now, it's very tough. But let's say it is true, and I will stay obviously true to my beliefs and tradition, etc., that if a relationship fail is your fault, right? And this is true for everybody, right? It's true for her, it's true for you, and it's indestructible. It's very tempting when, as soon as the heartbreak happened, to try to dissect everything of why it happened or not. But that tends to be, as we'll see now, just a normal response to something that you had to learn through the relationship. So sometimes getting over heartbreaks is somehow easier, right? And let's be honest, the psychology of heartbreak, as I said before, I don't really follow much psychology per se, but it is correctly, this much is true, described as an actual loss, akin properly to death. And I must say that this is actually true, all right? And unfortunately, I know that many of us had actual losses, people passing away, that really, and you know how that is, how different that is. It changes your life. But the way you process loss in the moment of heartbreak is practically identical to probably also a person passing away in your life, not having it there. And it's a moment, as we will analyze now, of deep loneliness, right? It's not merely solitude that probably many of us also thrive in, but it's truly feeling the sense, why, right? Why? What did I do wrong? And at the same time, you also feel like you know what you've done wrong. In the moment in which you are breaking down, you do feel that there is always something that you could do, right? There is always a way to stand up again. And this is actually the most important aspect of the story that I would like to dissect with you in particular, right? But back to our youthly endeavors, so to say. There is an age, your early 20s, that is definitely not good for simply rationalizing about a relationship. It may be actually the best time to form one for life, but our social cultural context makes it incredibly difficult. And in any case, let's be honest about it. 100 years ago, slightly before, being 13 or 14, like you were already a man. All right, you were already a woman. People got married at that age. People were incredibly tough. You were ready for it, and it was it. Right. Today, we consider essentially, basically, someone even in their sometimes early 30s as a bit as ungrown teenagers. Like I know people that, even just by family, by background, that consider like being still. Even a 40-year-old person young, which is sort of incredibly weird. And not because wait until you get there. I know, obviously, you feel incredibly young throughout all the ages. This is not the problem. And here I'm talking about how people are increasingly infantilized, right? And the process of maturation is incredibly delayed down the age, right? And this is really a problem for relationships. So this is for saying that those are also the social cultural factors that we're talking about, that until your mid-20s, you're simply not even ready to understand what a serious relationship really is. Your mid-20s start being instead more interesting, because at that point you have sort of understood what attraction, what sort of sentimental life is all about. And if you're lucky, you have, in theory, like men by their late 20s should be accomplished in a way or another, right? I could say, I was accomplished exactly right in time to remain within that chronology. And unfortunately, many don't make it. And that may actually be the most painful part of the wall. I honestly, like when we talk about the four testators, the last, in many ways, first of all, I have a great respect for people who come, I don't know, from the fourth estate and manage to turn into something better, right? In third estate. My familiar history, for example, my mother's side, like for my father's side, they were actually pretty affluent people that, however, showed me that it was a bit difficult there to maintain standards from a higher glory, including nobility and whatever. My mother's side came probably from the fourth estate. If you go back a pair of generations into the peasantry, like I don't know, millers, something like that, and I realized that these people were sort of kind of more driven, and I have all the respect for those who became, as they are today, the third estaters. You can argue that estates do not quite exist anymore per se, but it's obvious that if you see in the street an idiot that talks about BS, can't even speak properly, or that's a fourth estater, all right? And let's not descend into this trivia. But the problem, at least that I personally had in my second half of my 20s, was mostly I've always been a more mature person than my age, and I've always also been attracted here, not necessarily in a romantic sense, but it did happen as well, toward older people than I was, right? There is this idea, especially the younger you are, of the Gemeter, of the great mother, that, when you are, your 20s, it's, there are very specific terms I will not use, right? to be more, there's nothing wrong in it. Well, they're not particularly edifying terms, but I think more or less what I mean in terms of certain categories and fantasies and whatever. However, jokes aside, really, because again, I was more mature than my age, including in respecting girls and actually seeking some kind of serious engagement. In fact, the only reason I've ever got into an actual serious engagement, engagement means you're basically fiancé, you're going to get married. Now, here it's a involvement, sentimental involvement, that makes you think about the validity also of marriage in terms of what all these prematrimonial relationships are they really conducive to anything, right? It's an interesting question because it's painful if you think about it. Men are kind of considered okay for getting them, and women actually like men who have more experience, but this also means that your body count includes other girls that actually lost their virginity and eventually didn't get up married, ended up married with you, and that's actually a pretty bad kind of situation, right? For them. And so for also at some point, if you realize the value of such things, what could have been, right? But this affects men as well. I mean, I wondered myself, like, how far would I have gone as a person, as a man actually, hadn't I had those relationships? Because I said they were, considering how you wise up, how you man up, you say those would have been a waste of time. But you also don't take into account that, yes, now you know how it works, but also due to those relationships. And so that's a consideration. The heartbreak is the greatest accelerator, the speed up of this phenomenon, because without that, you can't quite understand how hard certain things can hit your soul, your existential stature, how you relate yourself with sort of the most important things. And at least for me, the issue in my second half of the 20s was that I understood I wasn't particularly, I tended to be more selective, first of all, towards women, which is something that is, at least in our society, counterintuitive. You would think you have all these memes online and in pop culture, whatever it says, you would do like the guy that will do anything to be with that woman or with a woman in general. That it maybe not even attractive that much. Like standards of attractiveness, even in in cinema and different sort of fields of culture, objectively are pretty weird and strange. I think I have a good eye for women, and I like very much the genetics behind it. And as you know, I believe that those genes are also reflect who you are as a person, in a truly spiritual sense. So there is a deep beauty in certain girls that are not necessarily like actually the the B series or hidden one that nobody cares about. But in some girls that you ask yourself also, how could they have been single for a lifetime? I had, for example, in my younger age, I didn't hear that much, but the older I've gotten, the more I've met with girls that were virgin. Girls, say, my age, grown-ups, right? And that was incredibly interesting to me. I've always had, say, not necessarily a great respect for the thing in itself, because some women were virgin maybe, without any kind of specific moral virtue behind it. But let's say, and I was always very struck by, normal girls that had apparently also, and admittedly, normal lives that had been successful without too much effort not to ever have a relationship. Telling the truth, I also found out that in some cases this leads to, let's say, it's important for a woman to be sentimentally experienced as well. And when I say sentimental, I'm not using a euphemism to say they should have had sex or anything like that. I truly mean, let's say, to have opened themselves to manly love, to the game of attraction and flirt, and sort of also love story and drama, including men's heartbreak and so on. I think that is very important for a girl, because women should understand what kind of power they actually have. Otherwise, also the man that is coming to conquer them eventually and successfully cannot actually conquer them, not because they're not attracted to him or they wouldn't do that, but because they have not given enough importance to love, and, for example, think that their profession comes first. I personally found lots of this in pretty much everywhere, but it struck me in the different fields where probably women know that they're going to age without an actual, at some point in their mid-30s with enormous risks of fundamentally not being able to have a child in a realistic sense. In order to get to know some, and this is something, again, that unavoidably also as an older man you realize along the way, that there is a timing, right? It is not much the timing, biological timing. I mean, I was born when my mother was like 20 days from 40 years old, all right? And even their parents, as they have this incredibly stretched generations over time, that is also very historically interesting for me, eventually, as I grew up professionally. But not everybody is my mother. Like, it could conceive that late. And with actually also some health issues at the time, which made it incredibly more extraordinary. Even normal girls, that, again, here the time we're talking about is the time you have to get to know someone in order to settle down, right? It happened to me, for example, that there was a girl I met exactly across this timeline of hers, and not the one of sort of the menopause later. I'm talking literally this sort of mid-30s phase where, in your early 30s, you think you're kind of young, but then when the mid-term sort of comes of this decade, you say, well, wait a minute, this is starting to be actually late, because even the women you may get with are already ideally they're starting to be, they're in their late 20s, but their early 30s, which is kind of the last time in which women are fundamentally sort of more easily fertile, right? A rate that for which you are, of course, unfortunately, moments in which some people can't have children in any case, so that's a drama, but it's not over for them at all. But you can reasonably think to have children without problems along the way, right? So that starts becoming complicated. And there are lots of women at that age that fundamentally seem to have, okay, I am 36 now, I redraw my life, I want to achieve this goal. And you as a man say, I don't know, well, this just to make an example, but I love you and I want to marry you, and let's do it now. No, I have to do this. Why? It's so insane. And you often discover in the sense that there is some problem behind the person. That is not necessarily a sort of a dramatic problem, but it is nevertheless going to be, because putting aside these dreams and also getting offended when someone tells you, look, with good heart and purpose, like for her, because you tell her, look, I love you. Do you understand? I love you. And you're special. I'm a person, like, I don't know, I'm a developed person. I'm mature. I've never seen someone like you. Let's do this. This is what everybody has done. Our parents, all our ancestors, and they say no, even though you know that they actually like you. That's the most painful thing. The thing is, I don't know, you're trying to score with a girl, and then, she turns you down because she said, okay, no, I don't like you. This is completely different. Sometimes you go on for years with someone, and eventually she doesn't grow tired of you, but she starts thinking that certain conditions that can be also pretty serious ones around her are a signal that she does not have to engage in this kind of union. And that is indeed very painful and very, very difficult for everybody involved. Now, as I was saying, the first half of your 20s, you're essentially mature to get. That's probably, in this day and age, the best time to find someone that you're going to be with. Admittedly, maybe slightly too early, right? As I said, I've always considered myself a bit sort of above average, without modesty, in many different compounds, things in conventional ways. And I'm not going to brag about this, but in general, it seemed to me that even I wasn't particularly ready for anything, not for anything serious. Actually, I was ready at the time. I recognize it today. To settle, to find the girl of my heart and then marry her at that age. But there is still something that you haven't learned, especially if you have sheltered yourself very much from heartbreak. And that's why heartbreak is so important here, because for a long time, after my first ex, I didn't have anyone. And this was completely normal to me. I'd never really been a man to say, okay, I'm not in a relationship, I'm dying to have a woman. I never really felt like that at all. I pursued in those years what you also have followed at a point, starting from there, as I started the channel. And in general, I must say that I had sheltered myself too much. I mean, not necessarily from girls. I really interacted with many, and I had girls like me. But I had arrived to a very strange conclusion, namely the fact that I would have not probably fallen in love, because you feel always colder, more rational, start feeling that your prefrontal cortex has consolidated at that point in life. And essentially, we're told today that until 32, you don't really reason as a full adult, right? Your mid-20s are a bit sort of watershed in terms of sort of wising up, manning up. And it is, in fact, this age, more or less, between 26 and 32, that is, in theory, the best to actually have a relationship for life, right? But unfortunately, it seems to me, at least it was not my case, that there are certain things you still have to learn. And why do we talk about heartbreaks? Because without that power, without the power of love, you can't get there. In fact, in that very age, if I was making the channel and everything, I had a girlfriend, and actually she was an extraordinary person. I've always liked, she's been a very good, positive figure in my life. But unfortunately, even though I was attracted to her and everything, I did not love her, and I realized that I did not care very much about her either. It would be very crude to say this, but the reason why I got with her was merely rational. Was saying that conventionally she's good, all right, and I even thought later on like I could go back with her even after we broke up. That didn't really hit me much, but it was a bit like I had myself being left, and I didn't think she would do it the way she did. No, she didn't cheat on me or anything, but she. I realized how a bit calculating she was herself about these things, and sort of perplexed me. And also, she had her own shortcomings later on. I thought to be, can say inexperienced, but let's say, I thought that a person that is more able to get relationships that pass from one to another is somehow more mature. This is absolutely not true. Many people do that exactly because they're deeply insecure and end up ruining their lives and their reputation and their general, they're going to have actually psychological problems. I've always tried to second myself not to rush in unless I really fell in love, as we'll see now, or to be actually pretty confident, as I was saying before, about me selecting the women, right? It's like when also on the sort of dating sites or stuff like that, you are the one who tests her because you want to find the right one, not because she thinks normally that you're dying just to get in bed with her. Like, you know what I mean? I don't know how frequent this is among men, but I think that it's actually ever more frequent. That a great reason why lots of guys haven't settled down at this point is that we're sharing this common issue, like that people in general, this is not about women versus men, but people seem ever more shallow, ever more ignorant, ever less committed, ever more cowardly. This is true, of course, also for people that you never get interested in. So admittedly, you never hardly ever fall in love with. I personally never fall in love with someone that was shallow, right? And there's a very interesting aspect about sort of how you actually choose to fall in love, how you deliberately make a choice, and you can even rationally realize it in the moment, even though you're literally the chemical process is starting. Now, that relationship, I was telling that my second ex, like, she was like, I can't say it, like, the relationship was positive. I liked being to it. We played house with, we played like, we had to stay together. We understood each other very well. We had common interests. Really, we bonded literally at a mental level, and physically it wasn't bad either. But at the same time, I didn't really feel much for this person. I didn't feel actually what I needed to feel, and this depends on character and personality. What do you want from a relationship, etc. I did find women that I was more captivated with. I liked the personality of, right? And other thing, I've never really been searched for a. Again, I want certain genetic standards. It may sound ugly to say, but yes, you don't pick certain. That may also be very painful. I'm conventionally good looking, all right? I have a good presence. I'm well built and everything. I don't have any issue from that point of view. I know that many men struggle because just how they are. I don't know how it would kind of help to give in that sense, but I can say, unrelated, and actually adding to the despair, that again, even if you look conventionally good, that is helpful as a basis of, it gives you confidence, whatever, but you don't have the dreadful biological clock that women have in many ways. And I would like also, I forgot to say this at the beginning, I could have introduced it better, that if we're talking about black pill, red pill, all that kind of stuff, again, that's for losers, all right? I'm not even going to address it. I see why those things happen, but you could easily diagnose why. Unfortunately, that starts from wrong assumption, pain, frustration, but also fundamentally maturity, right? If you are a confident man, if you have grown really into yourself, you know, if you have been actualizing yourself, to speak traditionally wise, you are in charge. You know that you are in charge, and this is something, in fact, that happened in my life thanks to a heartbreak, right? And that I wish I sort of not gone through for my animal sake. If you have a cat, you don't want to go to the same pain that you went through a heartbreak, but since you have some greater developmental spirit than a cat, like, you can't also learn from things, and that's the most important thing. So I talk about this. It was also a relatively famous thing. I fell in love with a girl and we had to actually move in together, right? And it turned out that years later she actually did it with someone, and I'm okay with that. I'm not jealous of the guy. I just think it was so strange. I'm actually glad that I didn't fall into that trap. She was a bit like the typical uh, uh, Mother Earth kind of figure. She was a very potent, feminine, whatever. She was an archaeologist, so she incarnated the level of chthonic beauty, and she was she was definitely an unusual type, and I decided to fall in love with her. I mean, I did, and I asked myself, do you know what this feels like once again? Because I had thought at that point in my life I would never fall in love again. I still believed it. Essentially, from my 23 to 24, to excuse me, my late 20s, I thought that I would never actually fall in love again. And so basically that happens when you're a teenager. Then you called up, like, love is not there. I was concerned. Then I found this girl in a very specific moment in my life at the end of my doctorate. It seemed like the crowning achievement of my existence. She wanted children. I had truly fallen in love with her. She claimed that she loved me. The thing was not true. She was a bit of an actress. And probably I wasn't how she wanted. Even though I behaved well, she was a fussy person. She was very emotional. She had anger issues, whatever. Like, so even though she had a point in things, like, and maybe I also didn't see some of the same, because she was actually older than me, and she acted as the more experienced, but she was making mistakes, and she lied, and all things I wouldn't do. I maintained the moral upper hand. And I can say that the thing ended. It was also a very brief thing, paradoxically, but it would have worked probably in different circumstances, which, let's not descend in which ones there at the time, but there was the pandemic, probably the quarantine and everything. But it really shattered me enormously. And at that point, actually, I had, also from a spiritual point of view, a very different posture toward reality. Essentially, throughout all my 20s, I thought that there is a knowledge that you can cumulatively put together to better handle life, right? What I learned, and I still believe now, is that knowledge is not a cumulative process, but it's a force multiplier, right? Knowledge, if properly handled through a particular doctrine, and we're talking about tradition essentially, can escalate your power in the world. And until that point, I didn't know that. And you can see it also through the history of Schwerpunkt, that when I got heartbroken, as we'll explain now, it was a tragedy, really, for me. Like, I felt very down, or better. I started feeling physically sick, even though mentally I was completely aware of what was going on. And I said, okay, well, it will pass. Maybe, yes, I said in the moment, this was a unique girl. I burned it. It was my fault. She blamed me, by the way, very nobly. Very noble thing to do for a person who claimed that she had a sentimental experience, to tell a person that, to properly feel angered by me. Like, the moment you love someone, it's something distractive from a psychological point of view. And I said it on that occasion. I felt less than a person. I know that it was under the chemicals and everything, but my mind worked, and that's where we get to heartbreak after an hour of video. Because heartbreak, in this sense, it derives from a sense of powerlessness, for sure. Like, with a girl, you have this sort of dopamine, also adrenaline, all what basically serotonin as well. I mean, I don't remember all the various substances. I'm not really interested in the details of this all, but let's say you really feel in another world, right? And I will skip here any deeper metaphysical implications concerning, like, science, body, whatever, how this thing really work. However, the sense of this mechanism was that personally, like I had treated, and that's where I went to spirituality, because throughout all my 20s it was more like religion was like I kind of understand it. Again, I studied history of religion at university. I had some broader sort of religious background, at least spiritual background, say better. I but in a serious way, even just culturally, historically, the place where I come from, and lots of different things that added to that. But I wasn't like, I don't know, a churchy person or whatever. But I understood the importance of the divine in my life. And in my 20s, I looked at God as a friend, fundamentally. It's impossible not to feel like that today as well, whatever we mean by God. But there was a very important switch that was produced by the heartbreak, because remember the cumulative process, right? I thought, okay, get knowledge and experience and I know how to fix things. It's sort of a very bidimensional situation, all right? When I got heartbroken by this girl that I really thought was my entire life, and still today, I must say that it was probably the most important relationship that I've ever had, in terms of possible sort of how close I came, in particular to actually settling down. And so making that step that sounds like almost an initiatic part of tradition, and it really is, right? Then actually love, as we'll see now, step up further once again. And I don't hide that this is the reason why I'm making this video, unfortunately, about heartbreak, but for giving you hope at the end of the day. This is a bit like the book of the Apocalypse. It's like, it's meant to be, oh my God, heartbreak, this is terrible. But it ends up giving you some kind of hope. And I explain now why. You can see, again, from the same channel those years, that this was a private conversation between me and God. I was very deep into Clausewitzian stuff. I reasoned in strategic terms. Basically said, if you go one way, just go, right? Because with women in particular, when it gets to the point it does not work anymore, you feel it's not spontaneous anymore, men, some would say, make this mistake of insisting, right? And insisting, not necessarily, the woman doesn't want to talk to you at all. Yes, it does arrive to that point, but it doesn't have to be stalking, doesn't have to be anything sort of forced, whatever. It's more like you understand that there is something off, and you're still pretending to make things work well. And especially when you have done things right, and you were really have you ever read that tale of the Dubliners, where there is the boy that is in love with the girl at the circus, and he takes, we're talking Joyce, obviously, the glass of water to her, and the boy said was telling that basically the boy thought that was the Holy Grail, right? For how much he loved this girl. That's how it felt. It feels like, normally, for all of you knows how love is. It's something truly metaphysical. It's something, it makes you see God. It makes you see heaven. It makes you feel how it is. Every kind of sense of transcendence, of heightened status, of higher condition, whatever, is fundamentally something connected with love. And it's 100% accurate in traditional terms, right? I could spend time and time and over again explaining this, even though it's practically impossible to do. It's as if life all of a sudden took on an actually ghostly character. You truly live into metaphysics. You truly live in transcendence. It's something incredible. You see the world in different ways. You're in disbelief almost of how beautiful this is. And actually one problem that happens, and it's completely normal chemically wise with heartbreak, is that you don't want to abandon that. All right. So when you are actually, and this is the most painful part, when you start seeing the woman that says, look, I don't want to talk with you again, it's over, or whatever, you just can't accept it, right? Many men go mad in that circumstance, and it's not a good thing, and that's why you should be handling yourself. So going to God and saying, look, God, I felt this, you know that I'm genuine in this. Why did this happen, right? At that point, leads you to frustration, right? There are people who renounce God when such things happen, right? Because in many ways, like you had been praying for this thing to go well, and you made pacts with God, and you, especially also when you're more mature, you say, well, we're more mature, actually, we'll see now what happens with God. That turns again to be your best friend. But there is that moment of break in your life that I think any man actually experiences at some point, when you take this very important leap in your spiritual existence, as you pass from God, please make this thing go well, to and why did this happen in particular? Because that's the question you ask. Why did this happen? Right? This unfortunately happens with also much worse things in life. Tragedies of unspeakable nature. I can't even think how a person can go through things like, I don't know, terminal illnesses or whatever. There, I really can't give you an advice, and I think nobody is really ever prepared for any of that. But love, in its transcendental and ultimately life-creating purpose, is the noblest of all powers. It's truly the purpose of any action. And so when you actually love this person, when you care about her so much, it's not just that you feel so attracted to her, but you actually like her as a person. Sometimes also wrongly. Sometimes this person doesn't turn out to be who you thought she was, right? And that's why falling in love is actually very dangerous in many ways. The question is, why did this happen? I mean, truly, what did I do wrong to feel so much pain in this very moment? Right? And you feel angry with God as well, because you're asking for answers. You literally ask, give me a sign of this. Like, you not necessarily make a miracle happen, because you realize that, there is a limit to this request. Let's say, make me understand what it is. If you're waiting for, like in a superstition, in fact, for a sign of God, right? That is simply not working per se, right? God at that point is also pretty darn, of course, as always, right, to give you any sign whatsoever, especially in that moment. It's at the darkest part of the night, right? And it's always darkest before dawn, the saying goes. And I don't want to give you too much hope, because again, 1 year and a half before you disintoxicate from the clinical falling in love syndrome chemicals, right? And at that point, you tend, and this is one of the most painful moments in a man's life, to cling on the hope that she's kind of coming back, right? That essentially you're going to become paranoid because unrequited love is actually turning you into paranoia if you don't understand how love works, and especially if you have some problem with it. Because personally, at that point, the heartbreak had hit my everything, because this girl was, as we said, she was very close to my field of work. She was really amazing. She was also a reenactress. She was amazing. I say this today. I mean, she wasn't probably actually a very amazing person. It's turned out to be, with lies and everything. But she, or maybe I want to think she was a good person. I hope for her that she was actually a good person deep inside. But evidently, she wasn't very good with me, at least. And she had problems. She had suffered cheating, for example. She had a difficult childhood as well. But she really wanted to do things right. And so I felt like the one who failed her. And it was terrible. And I hoped she would come back. She started this way after she left me, even flirting with somebody online. And I was literally, I had also a very strange experience, because on a site that nobody really actually knows, seemingly, it's not really a dating site, but we had met on there, and I came back there because she was online for a while, and several months later, or even more, and I had this weird experience that my mainly ego had been profoundly shattered. Right, I felt less. I experienced this thing that obviously actually made me really feel very bad about myself, as we explained now. So what was happening to me from a physical point of view, and that was actually a positive moment in my life, because in that moment you're desperate for validation. You think that well, you wanted to have children with me. Why did you leave me? Right? How am I suddenly like I'm your everything? You want to leave it, and from a day to another, you ghost me, and you don't even wanna take your own responsibility and admitting that you were wrong, that it was false. I never really fully known what happened within her at that, but she seemed committed. But say we had arguments on things that I thought actually, frankly, were right, but she took it very wrongly in a very subjective, emotional way. I will not express sort of judgments of where she was from or whatever. In any case, very strange anecdote. I created a fake account of a girl on that site, because the purpose was just think of how that was probably the lowest point of my life, even though again my life was fairly good. I created this female account to chat late at night with the guys that were still online when she had been online, and asking them if they were talking with her. Seriously. And I talked to these guys. Some of them seemed, one was sort of attractive men. Let's put it in this way. So I would think that she would be talking with them among the bunch, because probably she was talking with somebody else. But I would have not been surprised if they had gone for it. And in that moment, your masculine image is shattered, because the one who had to fully validate it in a traditional sense rejected you. The woman rejected you. So you're not the hero, you're the villain of the story, right? You're the loser, you're the tyrant, you're the Dracula of the story. And I don't remember praying very much, and we'll explain also now why. And I talked to this man that I expected to be, maybe, because this is the point, as a man, also on dating site online or in real life, etc., you don't talk to many other men to begin with. Again, yes, you think that everybody's an idiot, more or less. My great modesty and social mode. But let's say in the moment in which you're paranoid, jealous, whatever, you think that this man that obviously you're not talking to, that she's talking to, like she may be talking to, have some quality that you don't have. She's leaving me for somebody else that is better than me. It's a very common mistake that men do, and I would tell you, never think that is the case, especially as we will see now, if you can properly gain the moral upper hand. And I talked to these two men, with one for an entire evening, actually, and the other he was just so fucking of a child, honestly. It was painful, horrifying. I said, even if she's talking to this guy, I know that she'd never get with him. And if she did, like, we would have completely feel fine about it, because it's exactly what she would have deserved. And there was this other guy, and I couldn't. This first one was a bimbo. The other was like such a whiny bitch, like somebody who was also emotional and sensitive, that had all his story about himself, talking about how he had actually had supernatural experience, all this kind of bullshit, that he had saved a guy because he saw the projectile, all this kind of completely, and without any trace of further masculinity or control, whatever. Like it's somebody living in a sort of strange altered scenario, whatever. And looking at these human cases, I look at myself and said, I'm a fucking rock compared to this guy. I mean, what I'm going through right now, all the responsibility, all the strength, all the discipline, having to struggle every day with this pain, these people are not exhibiting. These people would break like nothing under minimal pressure. They're not ambitious. They're not charismatic. They're not saying intelligent things. It was beating them at words, by the way, like crazy. And they were trying to hit on me. He just left this guy. Oh my God, you must be a university teacher. Like, yeah. Like imagine a man that is trying to court someone, a woman who he thinks to be so hyper more intelligent than him. How can't you think he's such a loser in many ways? And it's not to say, I mean, the sense women have to be less intelligent than men on average, but in a relationship, aside from there would be much to discuss regarding that, but I will not enter the topic for today. As you know, the striking result is this: that male and female intelligence is actually quite, on average, the same, but men are both the most stupid and the most intelligent of the bunch. And women have less, they all tend toward the center. This is actual science, right? And I'm not, in fact, you can argue that the most intelligent men on average, people on average are actually men, as well as also the dumbest people on average are actually men as well. And that's incredibly fascinating in many ways. And that tells a lot about who has to be in charge in a relationship, by the way. And then, actually, I had, I was still suffering very much. As I was explaining now, probably I had a problem, physical problem, caused by all this. And I said, you know what? Because I had spent all this time thinking about everything we had said, this every single word. I was going back over and over again, like in a metaphysical dimension, back to that point. I was reliving it. I was reimagining it. I was reenacting. I was say not quite literally, but you know that in tradition, remember is something means to relive it for real in a metaphysical sense. And in this feverish, strange moment with the pandemic, isolation, darkness, whatever, if you had to be heartbroken, please choose spring or better. Like, no, you're done for, because as we've seen, 1 year and a half, you're going to pass through a terrible winter at some point, right? But the dark season is harder when you are heartbroken, right? And it was strange, like this feverish dream, like in Russian sort of 19th century literature, this sort of, I felt in another world. And that realization, wait a minute, I'm punishing myself, I'm beating myself over every single thing I did wrong, whatever. I actually am a better man than most men, right? If this is the average that we've seen here, I obviously, like, as a guy, you would always think, you're always concerned about who's better than you, because that's how men are designed, right? You always feel, even if, I don't know, I'm tall, if I find a person that is taller than me, I say, wow, I'm not as tall as that. You're meant to compete, that's and to battle in that sense. And only gradually, when things slightly started passing by, like passing away, I realized that, and I came back to be fully rational because it was altered by this chemical cocktail, that it wasn't much a matter of who was right and who was wrong. I was probably right all along. I'm really always extending a great deal of grace to my enemies, to people that I don't fully understand, to anyone who's evidently struggling. To say, well, I mean, if you struggle so hard yourself, right, you can imagine what other people may or may not do in that sense. And in the meanwhile, what did I get into? An adrenaline addiction. Yes, basically from the girl, I was so hyped when I was with her that the hardest part of my heartbreak there is that I had been hooked on adrenaline. And it was tough. I can tell you from a physical point of view, it's really something. Like, I don't know, people with stronger addictions, we were talking about addiction at the beginning, how they do that. I came out of it gradually after, and I had to call my uncle, who is a psychiatrist, and told him, look, I think I have this. I know what cycle starts spinning this. And it's me. I have to basically get my dose of adrenaline. I got out of it with the war in Ukraine, telling the truth. And because I substituted the adrenalinic rush, like in the causes, right? And my uncle said, look, there is medicines if you really need to. Otherwise, it will pass if you can't handle it. Because I asked him, because I was starting to get sleep deprived. I was starting to have, I don't think I had really either anxiety or panic attacks, but at some point I found myself laying down with my back on against the tub in the bathroom. I at night I had some issues. I was always in control. I'm very proud to say that I've never lost conscience in my entire life. I'm very sort of sturdy in many ways. But man, that was rough. Like, it was I understand it wasn't probably a great deal, but I felt the physical issue. And I hear people that complain about psychological issues that actually seem to be as everything, like including this one, self-induced, but for the stupidest reasons and with stupidest mechanisms. That felt more like something I'd never really felt. I was really addicted. I had experienced that in my first heartbreak, but this was something very, very deep, very new. It was an actual. Who can draw the line between pathology and non-pathology? I honestly don't know, but I felt what an addiction is, and I can tell it's terrible. But at the same time, it's more like a mental issue, right? It's not really. It's also physical. It turns into a physical one because of your mind. It's your mind that brings you down. All right. I don't think I've been depressed. There are people who are very down, but depression is very rare. Right? Most people, like me at the time, couldn't really cope with what was happening. On top of that, I had some chemical issues that had to be watered away. I can't say I finally got out of it, and it took me another year or so to recover. And the great switch there was, spiritually speaking, from asking God why to actually doing something very simple that I had never really, it's not I had never really thought of, but I never had pushed myself so much to the limit to need to think of it. Solve the problem myself. And with this crushing thought of guilt, of it was my fault, I did wrong, I accepted that it was, in any case, my fault and my wrong, still today, regardless of how faulty or wrong the other person could be. Because I said, if I don't come out of this, if I'm still questioning myself over this, it's because I haven't understood and accepted why it was my fault. And that's the moment in which I have gotten more deeply into tradition. I've started studying certain books. You've seen it also on Schwerpunkt. And I came up realizing that everything that happens to us is our fault. And this thing hypes you. It's very strange. It's very dangerous. At some point, you get to the limit where you realize, but if it is all your fault, you should beat yourself over everything. Worse than that. It's very different. When you take all responsibility for what you do, you truly become the better version of yourself because you can see and you can struggle beforehand to make things go right, to be noble. Not to change yourself, not to say a word for another, not to change yourself. Let's say if you have principles and if you believe in them, not betraying them. Like, that's what I mean. To be honorable, not to, for example, go after a woman and humiliate yourself in the process. It's very important for a man, again, to maintain dignity. Crying, for example, you would think at some point, like, if I cry, this girl will actually understand how serious this was, how much in pain I was. And then you think, even if she didn't believe you, it's not worth showing that, because it's not much that she's going to feel pity for you or she's going to think that you're less of a man. But the question is, you're nagging on me. You're the man, you're the provider. If you failed, I'm out. I don't owe you anything. That's how a serious woman behaves, telling the truth. And women are actually probably better wired to do this than men. Men remain attached because they found in the woman the purpose, the object, the goal, at least, of their own action. They start. Some people say, well, you started projecting everything on this person, you idolized her. There is a component of this kind which is risky, but this happens, frankly, when you're younger, right? When the reason why you suffered much more later. For example, this heartbreak, I felt like I had perhaps, like in a strictly physical sense, the same level of pain, of cyclotimic swings, or properly you feel like a grip in your chest that twists for half of the day. It's something terrible, right? But the worst thing was mental, because this woman was not a random girl that I had fallen in love with because she looked beautiful. All right, and I wanted to know, and I also admired because it had happened back in the day. But because this woman seemed like the right one, or it seemed the one that I had finally gotten. There is one aspect about men that we're always searching for that woman. In the moment in which we don't have one, we are restless, right? That's also why sort of men easily can sort of digress in a kind of harem mentality. Not because it's the harem is a man's fantasy to have simply so many women around in the same moment, but because they are fundamentally insecure, and so they want to maintain this false relations with as many women as possible, so that if something goes wrong with one, they can't fall back onto another. When you love someone, you have to take on and when you mature really as a man, you have to take on your own responsibility as far as realizing that true valor lays not in potential but in action. Potential is important, and we live in a world in which potential is evaluated in a conventional sense. As we said before, you have everything. You're good looking, you're well off, you're accomplished, you're in all this stuff. But the question is, what is this all worth if you don't actually succeed in love, and you don't have a family? If you don't have, that's really the problem. And so realizing that heartbreak is necessary, or you should even pursue that, is probably the greatest level of maturity a man can reach, right? I met a girl after this period, and I after a while, and she changed my life. This person, I can't even say how much I cared about her for so many different reasons, and I loved her. And for the first time in my life, I realized that I love this person in a selfless way. It's difficult to be completely selfless, and you can't be, all right? So there's always some level of selfishness. You're always sort of trying to strategize one another. But for the first time, realizing that a girl is someone you want to take care of and you're willing to sacrifice for, and you see yourself thriving in the actual fact and proof of, like, you dedicate your work, for example, to this girl, and you win, you succeed, you reach unprecedented heights, and you go on, and you're able even not to tell her that you love her, because she's going to be around and she likes you and she wants you in her life. This is an incredibly important level of maturity. And life is tough in many ways. Again, much tougher for many people, and we all will encounter a greater toughness that we didn't think could even fundamentally exist. However, there is an important point in this level of maturity that you acquire with love, and what you should be about. It's not much the idea that you would find another person. Yes, it is true that the old adage that you will find someone else probably is there, but you also realize that what you have grown like through heartbreak and through the disappointment, the thing that is the hardest of all, like being with her, being in contact, seeing her, exchanging, that, doing something that you didn't think so graciously a woman could do. There are some very rare ones that you fall in love with, that you want to be completely selfless for. They're not like any woman. You don't choose that like that. When this woman goes away, and she's so you realize that you will never fully know why she did so, and you're able to let that go, not because you stop loving her, but because you have truly run out of the opportunities of doing it, that is a level of maturity that say, okay, tomorrow is another day. Because at that point you will understand that how strongly you were hurt and how unfairly you were treated do not do anything against your armor anymore. And you will suffer a lot. And I don't hide it that I cried when these things happened. It's sort of very sad, but you start understanding the mechanism as an animal, why that happens. Right? It's not like you're crying all the time or you're literally thinking about this whole time love per se. Right? Sometimes, like when you're in love, this actually happens, but as a higher realization that you are in charge of your own self. We were talking about it just yesterday with as far as Stoicism was concerned. You know that even your failure, as we were saying before, because this is a failure eventually, has not been in vain. That you have lost, yes, you did because of your own fault, but that by now, after all what happened to you, doesn't hit you anymore. And I could give actually practical advice on how to cope with heartbreak. It's actually very hard. There isn't an easy way out, especially like the clinical falling in love is terrible. And the existential emptiness that you feel when somebody is not there anymore and you realize you've lost her forever is beyond description. Is terrifying, is dark, is ugly. But this is exactly the point. What tradition tells us is not seeing a mirage into the darkness. It's not seeing light where there isn't. It's realizing that the darkness is just brought upon by yourself, by your own limit, including the one that brought you to lose this person, that the light always exists. And it's not, say, tomorrow or, I don't know, because, you will find somebody else. Don't worry, there are girls. That may all true, but it doesn't have anything to do at this point with why you are there. The reason why you can say that is that if you truly believe to have power, you truly know how limited your experience really is, how greater the power as you have grown, as you have sacrificed for the girl, if you haven't asked anything in return, if you realized, I think this is important paradoxically, because it's not winning over the woman or having a negative idea of women for that matter, but it's realizing that you maintain the moral upper hand all along. That is the moment in which you say, even if I failed and I will have to pay for that, I still gave what was necessary for this woman to say, okay, I will accept, and she refused. That's where the sort of fault splits. When you are able to see that even though it is your fault, it's her fault at the same time, and that these two things do not go separately. They go separately as far as agency is concerned, but they are compounded into each other. And so if you fall, like if you fail, let's say better, in having given everything, right? And if you, in this sense, are able to accept your defeat, your limits, and saying, okay, it was my fault, I deserved this, right? Even if I miss her very much, even if I feel really bad about it, even if the hardest things, up to yesterday, or up to 1 month ago, she loved me, or she wanted to be with me. She gave me hope. I really saw myself somewhere else. I had a purpose. Last year, this time of the year, the same emotions that repeat themselves. It's terrible. Somatically speaking, you experience it, but you have to realize that the power of love, the power of your power, the power of your virility as a hero is so transcendental compared to this, that you are once again still in charge. You're once again not just a man, but the better man that you could be. And there's always a better man. There's always a best man that you can be. and become. And you will realize at that point that the pain that you feel, that the sadness that fills your days, that the remorse, the bitterness, the do not matter, especially because it's not worth to break your head over them unless you had never seen this before, and so you have to learn how it happens. That's what happened to me the second time. And in this sense, you will measure the loss, which is real and will never go away in this sense, but you will be able only through the appreciation of that loss to realize how much you can gain again. And this this actually happens through that loss once again. When you will actually realize that you will have the integrity, the calm, the discipline, the defiance, the quiet strength of moving on and saying, I gave my best, and so I know that I can trust myself to find someone that I love, even though I still love that person, and maybe are the same someone, because you will never know in the sense how the spirit of the divine manifests, right? We are all masks. We are all capable of changing face in that sense, but there is only one truth, and love is the mean to go closer to that. And my insight is actually limited here because there are other things that I've never experienced, other combinations, some of which are probably terrible. I will never say, I don't know, to a person who lost their family, had, 20 years marriage thrown to the bin by a betrayal, or that has to pay for, has to live in poverty for paying like extras to maintain families elsewhere while they have more affluence and that they hate you, whatever. That is terrible, right? Those are the things that should never really happen to a person. That's why you also have to be very, very careful with whom you associate yourself with. But at the same time, behind this lost hope, you have to be able to see what matters the most in a way that you didn't think it was possible to have. Some of you will say, but Schwerpunkt, this is exactly the hardest part to do. I mean, this is, how do I leave? How do I go on in that moment, in that day without? Well, if you've gone through that, you know that it actually passes, and that sense of adventure, of chase, it does actually have a cost, right? But it actually you know what it is, like, you know how it happens. If you don't know it yet, it's tough. You have to learn it, you have to suffer, and it will pass. It will take some time, but it will pass, right? You will keep the sadness within you. You will feel the bitterness, the pain, but that will at some point turn out to be the same dragon that you have been able to slay, and its power will be available, will be usable in your fight. There is an overarching picture of loss, right? It's not like you say, well, okay, nothing really happened. No, you burned yourself in the process. Otherwise, it would have not happened, right? And let's say we all struggle with these things, because again, I really don't think that most people that get together do so in a way that is truly positive. Many people get together and don't work well together, right? It's not even about cheating or a failed marriage. Just like some people end up just tolerating one another over time, or say don't really have much in common, right? This is really typical when, I don't know, the man works all the day, the woman stays with them, and they don't actually live together. They do so just in a sensual way at night, but it's not really. And sometimes there are issues, misunderstandings that do not get addressed, and things go right downhill. That is even more terrible. It's better to be single and to be heartbroken than even having to go throughout the entire relationship sometimes, especially if it has to fail without any meaningful gain from it, right? Even if, for example, as it happened to me when I didn't love my second ex, and yeah, it was just like an interesting experience in terms of you learn things like that too. But it's, was it really necessary? Would I wish, for example, to have done this with another person? And it's always very, very, very difficult to fully understand a person. My advice is also this: never try just per se to make sense of things. This is a very important advice. I mean, I just told you that you should make sense of what you don't understand, right? And naturally, only things we don't understand we need to make sense of. But there is an economy, right, a cost benefit, right, between what you don't understand and how much you can invest for no purpose into something, right? That's how you choose another person at the end of the day. That's how you're able to move on, right? And some people say there is some love that basically is impossible to move on from, and it's it's probably true. There are certain circumstances in which in life you love that person, you would never really have another one. And you know that. You may never fully know it 100%, but you kind of feel that person was really the better one you could have, and you lost her. And this is very sad, right? And there are people who die sad because of this. There is a girl who was in love with me, and she apparently still is, whose heart I broke, and she seemingly never moved on. And in front of this, the question is, because it's important the heartbreak is very harsh for the person to process, but we tend to forget that the heartbreak is a fruit of a disappointment from an expectation. And so there is always also another person who says no. And when we are that person, we tend to be much less sensitive to it. In many ways, it's because we actually feel the regret, the guilt at some point of having hurt someone and not wishing that to have happened. But at the same time, we realize that there is a dynamic there, that people sort of give each other a tough time in order to be better. And it's very difficult to see how love can be a mere match in a truly human sense when there is so much and so wrong that happens in the world all the time. You can wonder how can even people simply be together and stay together. And it's still a mystery, I think, that truly contains an initiatic relevance that the ancient world truly studied, and I wish we could cover in more concrete terms. Right. If you are struggling with a heartbreak, if you did in the past and you haven't gotten over it, you still are resentful about it, you couldn't process it in some way, just know you can't process it when you realize that we all have limits and that we should be able to fix them, but we can't necessarily fix them just by staying in this better place, very often just in potential, when love eventually does not turn into reality. And that doesn't depend much of another person. You can't impose that on another person. You have to be man enough to accept it as far as yourself is concerned, right? And sometimes I would say that much, that heartbreaks are shocks, right? I'm not treating them lightly as if, oh my God, you are Schwerpunkt, you are so, I don't know, disagreeable and masculine and acting like, oh my God, you can't take everything. No, it's not really true. It's really a tough thing. Like I wouldn't make a video on it so long, even on it hadn't I been struck by this. And whenever I make these videos, by the way, of similar topics, I always feel like I'm missing sort of the deeper point, not because I don't get to it or I don't cover enough of this stuff, but there are some fundamental truths about life, including the one of death, for example, the one of failure, the one of everything seemingly falling apart, that either you battle against or your life is over. And so that's why heartbreaks are tough as well, because we think that in the moment we have that key access, that last chance of saying, look, I love you, be with me, I will do everything for you, you confess your everything, and the other person, for some reason, is not ready to receive it, right? The other person, for some reason, feels like this needs to be cut, right? And just imagine, there are certain circumstances where you really care about someone, and this someone is even maybe in a dangerous situation, in a way that you would like to help her with, and that truly awakens that protector's instinct in you. That is not merely a whim, or say you want to simply to possess this woman, or even worse, to control her, to simply dictate her, whatever she wants. Everything, if it happens, should be natural and spontaneous, and at least happening through, say, natural, through a proper handling of both. And when the best person of our dreams goes away, fades, right, as a dream herself, we feel this deep sense of injustice. We feel this sense, but is life, why has life to be like this? Why couldn't be happy? Why couldn't this person simply say, look, why couldn't this person simply feel the way you do? What's wrong with you? Because that's the obvious, natural question that you pose yourself. And again, there is always, as we said, something wrong with you, but you have to be able to understand that between the two of you, there may be there's always the better and the worse, and if things fail, it's not necessarily, this may be the meager consolation of that, you're not the worst one. And even if you were, you would at that point understand it and understand the evil you've done. I personally, let's say, understand that I've done some evil in relationships, and I was doing evil when I was not being chased in particular. When I was chasing, I was giving all myself, I was actually very good, right? Too good, as a matter of fact, right? I had to be right, I had to be better, and many people in general, it's not just about men, obviously, feel like so that they are inadequate in an absolute sense. When you're disappointed time after time, you feel say, but I've done so much with my life. I've given everything I had, right? I really thought this could work. Well, the best way to get over it is to be a better person truly, because you would be surprised by yourself if once again you will meet that person, this person will have actually not been happy in your life. And you can say it's not a revenge to say, haha, you went worse for you, but it will make you feel that achievement of yours is a commodity, is a resource, is a reward, is a gift from God, like everything that we have, that perhaps other people will not have. And you shouldn't leave in the hope that that person will come again. I think that I think especially men, as we said before, don't accept the idea that a woman, for example, will block him forever. That's the last message that you ever exchanged, right? That someone who cared so much about you and truly enjoyed you, and you're sure of that, can simply coldly shut you like that. Women are very, very complicated, as we all know, but you have to be able, in this sense, to understand them as well, right? When a woman says no to you, it's completely natural to insist, to speak up your mind, but it's important to do so with grace, with kindness, with respect, with a sense of limit of things, right? That you can't beat yourself over the fact that if you arrived at a point and you had used another word, so to say, she would have stayed as opposed to the contrary. There are women who literally tell you, look, I like you, but I just can't, and now it's over, bye, forever, right? Because I can't now, and you don't think of me, and they do it for you. Another thing that I personally was always struck by is, again, I said it before, the increasing tendency of some women to give up entirely the concept of family, or at least to prioritize a type. It's not even the idea of the feminist who told them that have to work just for the sake of it. It's more like they want to carve, and they're so in pain sometimes, they're so worried, they're so concerned that they prioritize immediate security and whatever they can control in this sense, over the possibility of even settling down, having a family, being successful in that, right? And people also have different kinds of relationships in general, right? We tend to at least I tend to see things in the older way, but there are people today that do not have your same framework. This is not to say they're going to be debauched liberals with no morals and no form and whatever. We're talking women that on the surface look actually very traditional, and that for some reason end up simply bailing out because they're insecure. This is something that touches you very much about women, because as a man, you are the one who has to give security. When a woman tells you, look, family is not for me, like in this moment, I don't want it, sorry, I like you, but you're making me feel uncomfortable, because there are objective reasons why her life is pretty serious. But I'm not trying to justify anyone, right? I don't even think that's ever justifiable, or that any human action can be justified for that matter. But you can understand how it is from her side. Just let it go, right? Try till the end if you have to. And a woman would understand if you were true or not. But be a man when the line is drawn. Be a man when your heart is broken, but you're not. It's not simply you're not showing it, but you're not making a fool of yourself. You're not crying in front of her. You're not. It's a matter of your own dignity. There is a purpose to it. It's a safeguard. It's a way to make you move on as well. Like if you imagine it like this, if you are so concerned for every single word that is said in such circumstances, right? How would you prefer her if she's going to go anyway? Because if she was interested in you, she would stay. Would you like her to remind you to remember you crying? Or would you like her to remember you as a man who said, look, who did his most and then went away? And accepted, let's say, the situation. You don't have to go away. I mean, that sort of was defeated, but maintain his character, maintain his honor, maintain his decorum, his dignity. Right? This is, I think, extremely important for you, because it's better again, to go like that. I know in the moment there is this emotional urge to 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 higher the stakes, like to sound louder in sort of the magnitude of what you are uh, declaring to her and to give your heart most. But that things like imploring her do not work. I think women understand very much the who is the provider, right? Who's the guy who actually has the means to make it work, and still they would be able to, they would refuse it because either they're broken or that they're not really good for it. It happens, right? And some of these women actually would need just a reality check, like to see how actually beautiful they are through your own eyes, which does not mean that is wrong. It does not mean that you're idealizing her, but you're seeing the potential in her. The problem is that if this potential does not turn into act, it may be your fault. But as it hasn't happened, it's useless to whine over it. It's useless to sort of mourn for something that didn't even technically happen or didn't turn into reality, right? It's really a waste of time. It's like living in a shadow, right? And some of you will say, but sometimes these women come back. It's wrong to live in that hope. I know that we all would have liked that at some point, right? And we still obviously do in a deeper sense. And sometimes, like, it depends also on you have left each other. Like, it may even happen, but it's definitely not a thing. And in general, insisting, in particular, when women say no, they have drawn the line. This is not a good way to go, even for that opportunity. But right, if you also have to be practical, because many people today, for example, when they date online, they tend to give for granted that others can and would adapt to their own life, especially the man that is the provider thinks that, okay, I see this woman, we like each other, she will simply move in with me. Naturally, many women do that. This does happen. But many men also tend to think that, okay, like this must be given for granted, right? That women, even just talking with you or having, and surely engaging with you for the sake of some deeper connection and even for relationship, do not immediately work like, okay, so I will settle down, I will marry with this guy, I will move for wherever I am, I will make it. I say this because there are lots of international relationships, right? My first ex was Polish. I mean French. My second ex was Polish, and I've also have a pretty deep share of experience in this kind of things, and I must say that so you have to be realistic about your opportunities. Also, being in front of a screen all the time is not good. It's understandable for the means of communication that we live in, but you have to understand that the world is out there, and the world is always, it's not about finding a better woman. You shouldn't be out there thinking like that, but in order to realize that what mattered for you as a chapter in your life will forever be echoing with you for sure, but it will be deafening until you don't hear the sound of another reality, of another situation, right? And I must say that also, as far as falling in love is concerned, I think that ideally the most beautiful thing for anyone would be to fall in love, to reciprocally fall in love. Is very rare in general. But relationships where there isn't that clinical falling in love are also plausibly going to work, right? It's probably risky in many ways. There should be a very strong attachment. There should be a very strong sense of what really the both of them want. But if you're very mature people and if you have like a shared goals and you really like one another, like that is a good idea, and it can work, right? And then love can at that point, it will be at that point, okay, I'm staying loyal to this person because they're going to be take children is also a very beautiful topic, and that is probably what seals normally like a real family. You are a family at that point, right? But there is also the sheer beauty, the original beauty of sort of the man and the woman that have to make this thing work to begin with, which is sort of the most mysterious aspect of the world, which is literally a mystery again in ancient cults, and as such, you had to be initiated to it, and it's very complicated. Heartbreak is a bitch, all right. There is no way to go around it, but at the same time, everything flips when you realize it's an opportunity, not simply to meet somebody else. That's not the point, but to realize that this is a measure of who you are, right? That if love is truly a divine power, what you measure in front of it is like, a Bengala rocket. I don't have any flare in the night that shows you the battleground. Like it's something will remain with you and will make you mature and man up. And this is truly a very important path and step in somebody's life, and it's incredibly difficult to be honest about it. And I would think that we have, and I can't tell you, like, as a man, okay, we're all fellows in this, it's friendly. No, because we know how lonely it feels exactly as it's like, think about male friendships. Like, you don't see somebody from 20 years, but he's your friend, right? That's how it works, right? Women are different naturally. But this is the point. You're fundamentally alone. I mean, the measure of your worth is this loneliness, is the measure of which you cope with failure. And I think that also a lot of, because you wonder what's the next level, right? This selfless love is beautiful, right? And it seems to be one of the most mature, if not one of the highest, the most mature form of love. I honestly experienced it quite recently, and I realized that it completely flipped the sense that I had of heartbreak. And it's not like I didn't suffer enormously, but it's a completely different take and perspective on it. It's as if almost you start seeing the other side. And that's why I wanted to make this video, because I had to vent. I will tell you that it's been really 2 years in which my life changed completely because of this. And it's what makes you think about this is it's not much just as love declines itself into the world, but how the word itself declines toward love, right? You can't understand it if a person is not ready. You can't say it's immature, like without the negative bias of the term. Then there is a true chance to look at this past and say, okay, well, I didn't have to, after all, not necessarily waste my time, but let's say there is a positive that I gained. There was a rational reason why I had to move on, right? This is a bit the problem of life in general. Since we're not perfect, we can't pretend that our improvement will pass by sort of, crying at every step of the way we take wrongly. All right, it has to be a dynamic force multiplier, as I said at the beginning. And in this sense, a healthy relation with God and a sense of acceptation that suffering is actually more precious than simply lowering your defenses in that way is key to our understanding of what a leader is, right? Who do we want to have as a leader? Somebody who's sort of sensitive and starts, he expresses his emotions in public? Or do you really want somebody who, that tough son of a bitch took, a tramp us in the face repeatedly and still stands his ground without even flinching, we all are more sympathetic towards the latter. And that's what women actually want as well. And it's not like a toxic thing, like even every woman, oh my God, I want that man, because it's like, it doesn't work like it. But in your own way in life, just know that that's the best way for yourself. Speaking to men specifically, do you know that feeling that you have when a new door opens, right? When you're during the hunt, so to say, and you say, I'm both free, but I'm playing, and I like this dynamic. And I really want to see how it goes. And I really want to eventually fall in love into that Venusian trap and see how I can take control of the situation. That's beautiful. That's what we have as men. And it's draining. Actually, one of the most beautiful things why we tend to think that, okay, I want to settle down with this girl, I love her. And it is true, actually, is the sense, oh my God, finally, now I will have my superwoman in my house and I will not have to chase anybody. The hunt is over. All the resources that I spent for that are now devolved to whatever I want, which is, as a provider in particular, to my new family, hopefully. And it's over. And it is very appealing. Imagine, again, feeling that when you're totally in love, and it's beautiful, all right? But there is the sense that we all like to take up the fight once again if we are still rolling. And that's, I think, paradoxically, the best thing of it all. Not much that there is so much other fish in the sea, because it turns out that, most fish, is rot nowadays. But it's there is a chance, because you know that how much special of a person could turn your heart in what it did. This love lives in the world, right? I'm thinking about a specific medieval literature passage that I wish I had sent to a person once that really tells you this, that love is a desire that stems from the heart, right? And there is this appreciation. It's very, very sort of physically based. It is absolutely true. True love is about that. True love is genetic. True love is reproductive. True love is truly passionate and intense and commanding, and in this sense structuring, hierarchical. It's the full package, If you are a true man, it may sound a harsh thing to say, you have to accept even the worst things that really happen to you. If you succeed, good for you. It will be all much easier. You will not stop feeling pain, but your capacity to process that pain will be much greater, right? And it will actually be the fuel for your force. And I wish I could say this to my former self, not because, as I just said, that would spare him from any pain, of the pain that he experienced. This is valid for any of my followers and who cares about me in general. Just know that life is that hard, but that it has always a double edge. And so that there is never a moment in which you can't say, unless you're truly at the end, that there's nothing you can do. And even beyond that threshold, right, we have an idea that what we do in life echoes in eternity, like I would say that, but truly, in fact, has a meaning that stays, right? It doesn't end here, truly, right? It's not, again, to cite a movie, but it say what you do once, you truly do in eternity. That your choices, right? If you have to die, at least let's die well dressed, like other citation, movie citation. No, I truly mean let's do it in a way that God can look at you and say, this guy fell the way a proper man standing information against the enemy, discipline, that's accepting what was going towards really did. Because if there is any hope in the sense of this working in any meaningful sense, it passes through this. And this is reflected in everyday life. So you can always find the girl that breaks your heart and feel disappointed about it. But you can argue that it's never really meant to be about that in the first place. Not because she doesn't matter, not because you will forget her for the rest of your life, but because this belongs to a human dimension that is connected to a higher one, and what truly matters is how high you manage to fly, and how in perspective you're able to see that whatever happens has a meaning, but the greater meaning is the one that matters. And so this providential note, I hope, is helpful in some ways. And I would say probably much more. Today I wanted to talk about heartbreak and sort of specific mechanisms, how to stem it, how to feel better about it. There isn't, again, a way to get through it without pain or simply forgetting that. But there are ways, again, to see things in perspective. Surely history, tradition, religion, and more is what truly gets you where you have to go. We all wished things went differently, but remember that everything you will have done for that girl, all the things all the letters, all the when you woke up before sunset before sunrise to film it for her and sending it to her, all the care, all the attention, the well-meant words, the acts of the sense of I'm here for you. I do it selflessly. I don't want anything for you. It's beautiful exactly if you keep it like that. It's beautiful exactly if you don't lose your temper, if you don't see this as a frustration, as a you problem. We're full of you problems in the world, all right? And that's not what will make the world better, right? Let's make the world better by pursuing the highest possible love, which is definitely worth mentioning and as existing in a truly transcendental sense. And that is the objective of it all. So it mixes perfectly what we said, for that matter, with self-sacrifice in holy combat. What is this if not self-sacrifice in holy combat? What is this ultimately like? There are ways to achieve it, actually. There is even a higher principle in all of this that we could profitably discuss, but there is no doubt that this passes through the metaphysics of sex, right? And of sex truly meant in an archetypal and transcendental sense, right? Not the animal sex, so to say. What can we say about this? I don't know, because I see myself still as too young to understand the full of it. And the reason why I made this video is that I started seeing a pattern. Again, in my 20s, I mostly saw the things episodically and flat, like comparing singular. At this point in my life, I see it as a path. And this path is taking off, all right? In a higher sense. Probably if I hadn't made Schwerpunkt, if we hadn't talked about transcendence, I really want to resume our study of the traditional meaning of eros. I think it's much more important than we imagine. And you will forgive if your host here wanted to make a venting video for his sentimental misfortunes. And I just really hope that it goes well for you, that all the the camaraderie that we share in a way is truly reflected through sharing this wisdom, this knowledge between one another, like being aware, discussing these topics, and not falling prey of the lower modes of our current time. Right, we're really much better than that, and I think that love is exactly the field where true man is tested just as much as war. It's all one. Self-sacrifice in holy combat means taming and possessing the female demon of victory. So let's chase her, because it sounds really interesting. For today, however, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.